Right, good afternoon, everybody. We want to start with the first verse of this week's portion, which is Parshas Noach. And the pasuk says, Eile toldos Noach. And this is the history of Noach, the lineage of Noach. Then it doesn't list his lineage because Rashi tells us the true lineage of the righteous are their deeds, their good deeds. Noach ish tzadich, Noach was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'doratav, he was pure in his generation. Es Elokim hisalech Noach. Noach walked with God. The Rashi's words here are very often quoted. Rashi says, what does it mean? He was righteous in his generation. Rashi says, Yesh mi rabosenu dorshim oso v'shevach. Some of our rabbis expound this word because the word in his generation is superfluous. It's unnecessary. What do you mean? He wasn't living in another generation. So Rashi, some of our rabbis expound this for praise. If he was only living in the generation of the truly righteous, he would have been even more righteous. And some expound it in a derogatory fashion. According to his generation, he was righteous. Whereas if he would have been in the generation of Abraham, Rashi says, Lo haya nechshav klum, he would be considered nothing. Well, that's harsh, but that's what Rashi says. And Rashi's source is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Right? Well, really the source is the Midrash Rabbah, which we'll turn to in a few moments. But the first source is the Gemara in Sanhedrin 108a, where the Talmud says, what does it mean in his generation? Rabbi Yochanan taught in his generation, but not in the generation of others. B'dorotav, in his generation he was righteous, whereas in the generation of others, he would not have been considered much. Whereas Reish Lakish says, B'dorosav, b'kol shekem b'dorot achirim. Reish Lakish says, in his generation he was righteous. How much more so would he have been righteous in the generation of others? Now, I was always struck by the fact that this was a dispute specifically between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. I always found that interesting because the Gemara tells us in several places that Reish Lakish was, for a period of his life, a robber, a bandit. And so he knew the struggles of what it was like to be righteous when you're living in a den of thieves. So I always found it interesting that Reish Lakish takes the side that if he had been living amongst others, it's especially praiseworthy to be considered righteous when you're living amongst wicked people. But first, we'll turn to the commentary of the Torah Tamima before turning to the Midrash, and then turning to some of the comments of the Shpola Zeta. So, the Torah Tamima, by Baruch Epstein, writing in the beginning of the 20th century, he says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says, in his generation he would have been righteous, but if he was living amongst the tzaddikim of Abraham's generation, he would be considered not so righteous. First of all, by the way, Rashi says, before we even get to the Torah Tamima, Rashi says if he were living amongst the generation of Abraham, he would have been considered nothing. This is already difficult to me because, okay, Abraham was righteous, but who else was righteous in the time of Abraham? Nobody else was righteous then, so he would have been considered, okay, be number two. Okay, maybe Abraham is the greatest, be number two. Why would he be considered nothing? Why would he be considered nothing in that generation? So that's a strange expression that Rashi says. You could say he wouldn't be as great as Abraham. And he would be considered nothing. So the Torah Tamima comments on that. He says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that if you would have been other generation be considered nothing, the explanation is that if he would have been in the she'im haya b'doros tzadikim lo ha'isa tzidkaso shelo nechshevet. It means his righteousness would not be considered righteous. U'amanda Amar, whereas according to Rish Lakish, who says, for sure, if he lived in the generation of others, the intent is, Shemaya b'dorosh sel tzadikim, if he was in the generation of the righteous, hayolo made me midosehem. He would have learned, he would have become even better by viewing the way they behaved, by viewing the way they acted. Because just like now, when you see the generations of the wicked, he's seeing their actions, but they're wicked. But if he was living amongst the righteous, he would have learned from them how to act even better. Then the Torah Tamima says as follows: Velonis Bayer, he says, not clear. This is a big question. He says, I don't understand. Why does Rabbi Yochanan have to go out of his way to say he's not so great? The Torah says he was great. And all of a sudden Rabbi Yochanan says, what forces Rabbi Yochanan to say that? What forces Rabbi Yochanan to say, he's not so great? You could really expound this in a praiseworthy manner. You can certainly expound it in a praiseworthy manner. It's possible to say, so this is the Torah Tamima's explanation. Come back to some other explanations. It's possible to say the Rabbi Yochanan l'shita say b'midrash Rabbah, and we'll read the whole midrash in a moment. But first, we'll just take the Torah Tamima's explanation of it. He says it's possible to say that Rabbi Yochanan follows an opinion that he says in the midrash. He said that Noach was lacking faith. Noach mechusar amunah haya. Noach was lacking faith. He never really believed that the flood was going to come. And so therefore, he never went into the ark until the flood actually started. And let me come back to this Torah Tamima. Let me read the midrash. I'll come back to it. So the Torah Tamima is saying that Rabbi Yochanan was based. Rabbi Yochanan says Noach was not so hatzi-tatzi, not so ay. It's based upon this midrash. Let me read this midrash. I have this beautiful midrash rabbah from Rabbi Ben Minzach Rono Bracha. He bequeathed his library to our yeshiva, so we're able to study it. This is what he says. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemiah discussed the meaning of this word. So he says as follows. Hold on one second. This is based upon this midrash. In his generation, Rabbi Yehuda said, "B'dorotav hayat tzadik." If he was in his generation, he was a righteous man. But if he was in the generation of Moses or the generation of Shmuel, lo hayat tzadik. Hayu haya b'dorosh al Moshe b'dorosh al Shmuel, lo hayat tzadik. He would not be considered righteous. As the saying goes, B'shuk Simaya Tzavachan Avira Saginor. In a street full of totally blind people, they call someone who is weak-sighted the one with good sight. Means, say, if you're amongst people who can't see at all, but you have a little bit of sight, they call you the one who could see. Mashal Echad Shahayalo Martef Echad Shel Yayin. It's a parable to somebody who has a barrel of wine. He has a whole wine cellar. He opens one barrel and he finds it's filled with vinegar. Shnia Kane, he opens the second one. Shlishis umatza koses. The second one was also vinegar, but then he opened the third one and he said, you know what? It's not vinegar, but it's sour. It's starting to turn. Amrina, why they say to him, don't drink that wine, kosesu, it's sour. Amralon, he said to them, V'is hacha tavmine. He said, is there anything better than this wine? Amralay, they said to him, no. So Kach b'dorosav hayat tzaddik. In his generation, Noach was righteous because there was nobody better. If he was in the generation of Moses or the generation of Samuel, he would not be considered a righteous person. Whereas Rabbi Nechemiah said, "Uman b'dorosav hayat tzaddik." So Rabbi Nechemiah said, if he was righteous in his generation, how much more so would he be more righteous in the generation of Moses or Samuel? It's a parable. It's like a parable to a plate or a flask. Or tzaluchas is a flask of a parsimon, of balsam, and mukefes samid pasil. If they sealed it and placed it amongst the graves, and its smell was going all around. Now, if it had been outside of the cemetery, how much more so would it have smelled good? But in the cemetery, it didn't, its smell was, I don't think they mean a cemetery, I think they mean a morgue. Its smell was not so great. And they give another mashal in case we don't get the picture. Mashal besua sha'isa shuria b'shuk shel zonos. It says a parable to a virgin who is living on the same street as harlots. She managed not to have a bad reputation, even though she's living amongst the harlots. If she had been living on a street of kosher women, how much more so would she have had a good reputation? So, if in his generation he was righteous, how much more so would he have been righteous in the generation of Moses or Samuel? That's a classic midrash, but the Torah Tamima was referring to a different midrash. Actually, I read the wrong midrash. I opened up the wrong page. But regardless, I'll quote the Torah Tamima, and then I'll come back to explaining this midrash. The Torah Tamima is referring to a different midrash, which Rashi also quotes later on in our parasha, which says that Noach was lacking in faith, that he waited until the flood reached up into the waters, reached up until his neck, before jumping into the ark. So the imkain lididei be'emes lo isa bo shleimus ha'amunah kamo b'tzadikim zulato. Noach did not have perfect faith like others did. If Noach didn't have perfect faith, then the expression tamim haya b'dorotav, then why does the Torah call him perfect? If he didn't have perfect faith, why does the Torah call him perfect? And so therefore, the Torah is telling us in his generation he was perfect, but not in other people's generations. In other people's generations, he was not perfect. Hold on, I'll take questions in a moment. In other generations, he was not perfect. I had another thought about that, which is, I think that the rabbis were bothered not just by his lack of faith, but also by the lack of influence that Noach did not have. Noach was not able to influence not only the wicked people of his generation, he didn't even influence his own family. When they came out of the ark, his family, at least some of his family, went and continued to sin. So it's clear that Noach did not exert any influence on other people. So how could there be such a thing as a tzaddik who doesn't influence a single person? I saw a couple of other explanations, and then I'll open it up. I saw the explanation here in this commentary in the Midrash that they say, first of all, from Rav Yosef Shalom Al Yashiv, he says, of course, the plain meaning of the verses is that Noach was a tzaddik. So what does it mean? Why is Rabbi Yehuda saying he was not a tzaddik? So he says that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemiah are really arguing about something else. They're arguing about what motivated Noach to be righteous. What was the motivation behind Noach to be righteous? So according to Rabbi Nehemiah, who says if he had been living amongst other people, he'd be even better. And Noach, he says Noach had an innate desire to be good. Even though he didn't have anybody around him who was good, he had a desire to learn God on his own. And so he went against the tide and he grew to great heights. So that if he lived around people like Avram, how much more so would he have been able to find his path? However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what motivated Noach to be great was the corruption that he saw around him, the moral decay that he saw around him. So he saw so much perverseness in the world, such a spiritual abyss, that he said, and he says, I need to rebel against them. I can't live with them. I need to go into an ark and be withdrawn from all those people. However, if he had lived in better times, he had lived in the time of Abraham, for example, so then he would not have had the need, according to Rav Elyashiv's explanation of Rabbi Yehuda, he would not have had the need to separate from the world, because he would have seen such great people in the world around him, and he wouldn't have needed to separate himself inside an ark. It's a very creative explanation of Rav Elyashiv of blessed memory. So that's one approach. Again, I'll just repeat it, that Rabbi Nehemiah was saying Noach just desired to be, according to Rabbi Nehemiah, Noach is desiring on his own. He didn't see anything around him. He desired to be great. So if he had seen others around him who could mentor him, he would have for sure been able to be helped by it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda was saying Noach was disgusted by the world around him, so he needed to go into an ark. And so therefore, if he had others who were great, he wouldn't have had to withdraw into the ark. And there's another explanation of Rabbi Hirsch, who also, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who also tries to understand that both of these approaches are not deprecating to Noach. He says as follows, that of course the struggles that Noach had in his own generation had the effect of hurting him. However, he says, so in objective terms, Noach accomplished less than Abraham or Shmuel, because they started from a higher place. But Noach still, even though he didn't reach the great accomplishments of what Avram and Shmuel and Navi reached, but that's because they started from a higher place, so that they had a much more advantages, and they were able to achieve much more. But Noach achieved what he achieved in his times, that Hashem, according to Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, Hashem takes into account the difficulties we have to do. For example, I'll just say this: it's no big deal to get 10 Jews together to make 1 million if you're living in Jerusalem. I mean, there's 40, or if you're living in Borough Park, there's 40 minyanim on every single block. But if you're in the middle of, let's say South Dakota, and you're somehow able to manage to get 10 Jews together and make 1 million, what a tremendous accomplishment. Well, you're able to do that. You're able to bring the Jews together. Like if you're able to build a synagogue in Catania, wow, so that's the special thing that Noach was doing. That what he was saying, like, you achieved what you achieved against those circumstances. That's a tremendous achievement. And so therefore, the accomplishments that Noach was able to do in his times were much greater in this context than all the other righteous. I wanted to just say what the Shpoah Zayda said. The Shpoah Zayda says like this. He says, I don't understand Rabbi Yochanan. Why does Rabbi Yochanan have to say, in his generation he was great, but if he was living amongst the truly righteous, it wouldn't have been so great? Normally, we give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Why was Rabbi Yochanan going out of his way to treat Noach so harshly? So he said as follows, because the Shpoah Zayda, he must have had some people, some tzaddikim he saw around him who were truly great tzaddikim, but they weren't perfect. So he said, if if the first time the word tzaddik appears in the Torah, the first one who's a tzaddik is Noach, and nobody criticized him, and he was perfect, and then we would have thought, says the Shpoah Zayda, that for all of eternity, the only one who could possibly be a tzaddik is the person who nobody ever raised a question against, who was, everybody assumed unanimously was perfect. So therefore, the rabbis had to say from the beginning, Noach wasn't perfect. I mean, not that he wasn't perfect, but that not everybody accepted him. From the beginning, we had to say that a tzaddik doesn't mean that everybody thinks you're perfect. And so therefore, that's why he says, and that's why some Rabbi Yochanan wanted to puncture it, so that not everybody would think that in order to be a tzaddik, the whole world has to think that you're perfect. But I'll just pause now, take some questions if anybody has any questions about this.